We're going to Tokyo. I'm hosting my second trip to Japan, March 1st through 7th. We got spots left. Your trip comes with tours of Tokyo and Nagano with me and a local guide and bullet trains and karaoke, 2 group dinners, a tea ceremony, all the things. Hit the link in the comments for the full itinerary. See some history, meet some folks who like history, and come to the greatest city on earth. If you walk around Yokohama, near Tokyo, there's a historic hotel not far from the water that has something really unusual inside. A framed plaque proudly explains this is where Douglass MacArthur stayed on his first night occupying Japan, and the room has been perfectly preserved ever since. Who brags about the guy that conquers you? Who is this guy, and why does Japan like him? It all starts with Douglass MacArthur's father, Arthur MacArthur, swear to God, a top-ranking general who raised Douglass with bugle calls and advice over breakfast about how to run a military. Father and son visited Japan together in 1905. This was shortly after the military dictator pretending to take orders from the emperor was replaced by a parliamentary democracy pretending to take orders from the emperor. Arthur MacArthur told his son, "Don't take advice from your fears, or your peers, or listen to anyone. That's the MacArthur way." Big shock, Douglass MacArthur went on to military school. He earned top marks, exercised on broken glass, went into battle, and earned multiple medals of honor. Ladies want him. His mother moved in next door to him in college to help him manage his multiple affairs. And US presidents want to be him. No presidents on the front lines.
I would rip your arm off and beat you with it if it weren't a crime against America.
He was every bit the man his father was, and then some. One aide wrote, "Arthur MacArthur was the most flamboyantly egotistical man I had ever seen, until I met his son." When they invented a new medal called the Purple Heart, Douglass MacArthur used every connection he had to make sure he would be the very first person to get one. And then he engraved a number 1 into it. Douglass moves up the ranks to Army Chief of Staff. This was Depression times, and a bunch of veterans are marching on DC demanding to cash in their government retirement plans. The president would like them to go home. In walks MacArthur. "Army's got this." He declares the protest is treason against the government and runs over their camp with tanks. "Sir, that was the most brazen abuse of military power I've ever seen." "Is that what your report says?" "No, sir. It says you're a genius." Attaboy. That little fiasco cinches the election for President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. MacArthur, hot off the rush of facing 0 repercussions for defying the last president's direct orders, storms into FDR's office demanding more money for the army. Now, FDR is not a super imposing guy. He's a polio survivor who can hardly stand without assistance, and he is too friendly. This is the man who worked with Joseph Stalin and said, "I just have a hunch that Stalin is not that kind of a man. I think that if I give him everything I possibly can and ask for nothing from him in return, he won't try to annex anything and will work with me for a world of democracy and peace." But whatever he said to MacArthur in that room scared him so badly, he threw up on the front steps of the White House on his way out and took a job on the other side of the planet. See, America was bored of colonizing the Philippines and promised them they could be independent in 1946, and nothing bad will happen to them before then. One of the items on the to-do list was to get their very own army up and running, so they hired MacArthur to help them get organized. It wasn't a big army, and certainly not well equipped, but they called him Field Marshal and stroked his ego, so it was a win-win. MacArthur's underling, Dwight Eisenhower, was asked about his experience in the Philippines. He said he was studying dramatics under MacArthur. One day in 1941, MacArthur gets an ominous call from President FDR. "What do you want?" "MacArthur." "Mr. President, sir." "You're returning to active duty, effective immediately. Just in case." "In case what?" Japan invades the Philippines. The Philippines hasn't got the men or the guns to stand a chance, but MacArthur digs his heels in. Turns out there was some real bravery to back up all that bravado. This man refused to stay in his bunker, even though he maybe should have. 2 soldiers once had to throw themselves in front of a bomb that landed right next to him. The Japanese expected to take the islands in 2 months tops, but 4 months later they were still holding out, giving the US Navy enough time to mount a rescue mission. MacArthur wants to fight fight to the last man, but he was kind of America's only war hero who was still active, and losing him would have been bad for PR, so... Quit being dramatic and get in the boat! MacArthur gets in the boat, but he vows to return. He spearheads the American campaign in the Pacific, and no one knows how to handle him. The Americans can't handle him because whenever their reports don't line up with his gut instincts, he just ignores them. The Japanese can't handle him because I can't track him! He just showed up 600 miles deep into our territory! Why would he do that? The only place he was sure to visit was the Philippines. He told FDR there is no campaign without them. He makes his dramatic return, which is great for morale, and prepares to invade the Japanese home islands. This would be his longest, bloodiest, most glorious mission yet, if it hadn't been outsourced to Oppenheimer. The Japanese emperor does not mess with nukes. Japan surrenders, MacArthur rocks up to Yokohama, he steps off his boat into a crowd of people who moments earlier were all trying to kill him, and announces he's in charge of the country. Japan's entire strategy during the war was to be the biggest pain in the rear they could, making every battle the biggest, most climactic fight they could, death marching their prisoners, and making every inch of ground cost a gallon of blood. They expected retribution, and the first thing MacArthur does when he gets to Japan is take a selfie with the emperor. MacArthur noticed that in 80 years, Japan's gone from a shogunate to a democracy to some kind of fascist junta thing, and the one thing they all had in common was insisting there's nothing to worry about because the emperor is definitely still in charge. When in reality, he had some degree of power and was definitely complicit in the whole World War II thing, but not exactly an absolute monarch by any means. So MacArthur worked out a deal with the emperor. If he agrees with everything MacArthur does, he won't go to jail for war crimes. So they take a picture together to let everybody know they're besties now, and look! The emperor isn't a god, he's just a short king. And now Japan gets democracy back and MacArthur's gonna help rebuild their economy. But he can't stay long because FDR's good friend Joseph Stalin isn't so interested in jolly cooperation. The Cold War is on and Korea is being overrun by communism. MacArthur hops over to Korea and in his usual fashion forces the North Korean army all the way up against the border with China. China, who has just gone communist, sees an American army at their border which has just stomped on communist Korea, led by General MacArthur spouting off about how he wants to nuke China and bring back the old Chinese non-communist government. China enters the Korean War, and what they lack in technology they make up for with overwhelming manpower, pushing the US allied forces back to the 38th parallel, which is technically still a war zone between South Korea and glorious leader Kim Jong-un to this day. This is the incident where MacArthur is finally called to the principal's office. President Truman would like to have a word with him. You're a loose cannon, MacArthur. Let me nuke China! We can't use nukes. Didn't seem like such a big deal when you stole my thunder in Japan. This would start World War III. There's enough nukes for Russia. You're fired. No, you're fired. MacArthur runs for president. Kinda. He unleashes a flurry of fiery speeches against Truman, but he never actually announced his campaign. His plan seemed to be to wait for the Republican Party to deadlock between the two other candidates, then swoop in at the last second as the only candidate who's actually run a country before. And hey, that country's reviews were pretty good. In Japan, democracy was back, the government was stable, and the Korean War was like crack for Japan's economy. Factories started popping up all over the place to start cranking out munitions for the Allies, factories which later produced bullet trains and Toyotas and Walkmans and Game Boys. But MacArthur was not the only candidate who's run a country before. While MacArthur was leading the war in the Pacific, the man leading the war in Europe was none other than his former underling, Dwight Eisenhower. Post-war, Eisenhower was governing the American-occupied zone of Germany, and whereas MacArthur ruled Japan with the unquestioned power of a dictator, Eisenhower learned how to play politics. Public interest in MacArthur faded as it becomes obvious his whole campaign is about settling a grudge with Truman, and Eisenhower becomes the next president. So, MacArthur slinks off into retirement. He was a crazy SOB. They say the best and worst things you hear about him are probably true. But when the US needed a hero, he was the only man qualified enough and conceited enough to be the hero they needed. In Korea and the Philippines, he became a liberator. And now, in a hotel in Yokohama, there's a plaque For the man who came, saw, and conquered, then told Japan to rub some dirt on it and get back on its feet. Don't forget you could come visit next March. I'd say it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, except everyone I've known who goes to Japan immediately plans to go back, no matter how long it'll take. This trip has so much history and culture, great food, and great company. We'd love to meet you there.